Our unconscious beliefs may actually be more powerful than our explicitly held beliefs simply because we're not aware of them. So this is we recommend taking this test that Del mentioned at implicit.harvard.edu to learn about your unconscious bias. I really recommend going to this site. There's a test there on gender and science. There are many tests there, though. There's also one on gender in the workplace. There's one on bias against different races and ethnicities, age, religion, weight. There's all kinds of categories. And so they're really illuminating. They only take about 10 minutes to take. And at the end, you find out kind of what your implicit bias is about that subject. So I recommend you take that. And second, if you do have biases, and most people do, you can take steps to address them. So simple steps such as actively learning more about female scientists and engineers can help to give you more information, accurate information about women in science. And having positive images of women in science in your office or classroom or home can help to reset your biases. And that may seem kind of like a silly idea to have pictures of women in non-traditional occupations in your office, but Dr. Mahzarin Banaji herself has this in her office because she has these implicit biases. And there's an interview online on the Scientific American website where she talks about how she has these up, because what it does is it really changes the way what you think of as normal when you see that all the time. So, and I do want to emphasize that on all these tests of bias, there's no difference between men and women in terms of who has this bias. It's something that we all have. The final research finding from Why So Few that I'll talk about tonight shows not only are people more likely to associate math and science with men than with women, but people often hold negative opinions of women in what are considered to be masculine positions, like scientists or engineers. Research by Dr. Madeline Heilman at New York University shows that people judge women to be less competent than men in what are considered to be male jobs, unless the women are clearly successful in their work. And Dr. Heilman finds that in this case, when a woman is clearly competent in what is considered to be a masculine job, she's then considered to be less likable. And clearly, both likability and competence are generally needed for success in the workplace, so that can put women in these fields into a difficult position. These findings are presented in this chart, and we make a few recommendations about how to counteract this bias, including first, raise awareness about bias against women in science and engineering. Once men and women in these fields are aware that bias exists, they can work to interrupt the unconscious thought processes that lead to bias. For women in particular, just knowing that gender bias exists in science and engineering fields can help them understand that if they encounter social disapproval in their position, that it's likely not personal. And second, create clear criteria for success. So the more employers can clarify performance standards, the less supervisors will fall back on stereotypes, like the stereotype that women are less well-suited to science and engineering professions, to assess their employees. When the criteria for evaluation are vague or no objective measures of performance exist, an individual's performance is likely to be ambiguous. And as Dr. Heilman's research shows, when an employee's performance is ambiguous, people judge men to be more competent. Women and others facing bias are likely to do better in institutions with clear criteria for success, clear structures for evaluation, and transparency in evaluation. So I've described 4 of the findings presented in AUW's report, and now I'm going to talk a bit about women in leadership generally. Despite the fact that women make up 26% of the non-student ESA membership, only 4 women have been presidents of the ESA. If women were being elected in proportion to their current presence in the non-student membership, one would expect there to have been 15 female ESA presidents in the past 59 years, but there have only been 4. So why so few women in leadership? Well, first, it's important to point out that this is not a problem unique to the field of entomology, but it's found in all fields: medicine, business, law, academia, everywhere. Women rarely make it to the top of any profession anywhere in the world. Out of 190 heads of state, 9 are women. Only 6 out of our 50 states have a female governor. And women only hold 3.2% of CEO positions in all publicly traded companies. And closer to home for many of you, I learned just before this talk from Sharon Quisenberry that in 2010, women made up just 17% of tenured entomology professors. So the data show that there has been progress. Today, women and women start out approximately at the same salary and rank, but advancement is slower for women. And as careers progress, women earn less money and they reach milestones later than men. according to social psychologist and leadership scholar Alice Eagley, it's not so much a glass ceiling that women face as they approach the top of their professions, as it is subtle barriers at every step along the way that culminate in very few women at the top. She finds that obstacles that women face operate with nearly equal strength at each stage. So the problem, in other words, is not so much a glass ceiling as it is a labyrinth of obstacles at every level of a woman's career. Dr. Eagley also is clear to state that the increased representation of women in leadership is by no means inevitable. And at this point, by many measures, progress has stalled. The number of women in leadership will not necessarily continue to grow unless we make a concerted effort to make it happen. So this is why it's so important for leaders to pay attention to this issue, and why I have such appreciation for your president, Dr. Delphos, who's giving such prominence to this issue of diversity and especially women's representation in entomology at this meeting. Two concepts can help us understand why few women are in leadership positions. The first is the concept of gender schemas. Also, these are similar to gender stereotypes, but it's less of a negative term. It's not, the idea of a schema is not necessarily a negative thing. It's something that we need to have to to operate in the world. It's a term coined by Dr. Virginia Valiant, a cognitive scientist at Hunter College. So gender schemas are hypotheses about what it means to be male or female, and hypotheses that we all share, men and women, that cause us to underrate women and to overrate men. Gender schemas are behind the implicit biases that I mentioned earlier. And schemas come from our brain's natural tendency to categorize stimuli. As our brains develop, we create schemas for objects like tables or chairs or cell phones, and as well as groups of people. And these schemas help us to function in a complex world. So gender schemas assign different psychological traits to males and females. We think of males as capable of independent action, as oriented to the task at hand and doing things for a reason. We think of females more as nurturant and expressive, acting communally. In brief, men act and women feel and express their feelings. Even genuinely objective characteristics like height are not immune from the effects of gender schemas. When looking at men and women of the same height, people tend to judge women as shorter than men, because we all know that women on average are shorter than men. Likewise, women are less likely to be perceived than men as leaders. So even if women are in positions of leadership, they have to work harder than men to show that their apparent position of leadership is a real position of leadership. This quote from Kim Campbell, former Prime Minister of Canada, illustrates the double bind that women in leadership positions face. So she says, "I don't have a traditionally female way of speaking. I'm quite assertive. If I didn't speak the way I do, I wouldn't have been seen as a leader. But my way of speaking may have grated on people who were not used to hearing it from a woman. It was the right way for a leader to speak, but it wasn't the right way for a woman to speak." So psychological studies are quite consistent in showing that dominant behavior is more damaging for women than for men. When women stare at others while speaking to them, point at people, engage in any type of self-promotion, are assertive, or even simply disagree, most of us view it negatively. Men, on the other hand, can lead in a warm or a dominant manner with no penalty either way. So it's not surprising that we're more resistant to following women than men in leadership positions, and that women are more reluctant than men to pursue leadership positions. The second concept that can help us understand the small number of women in leadership positions is accumulation of advantage. So each incident of being judged based on a particular gender schema is a small thing, and one might be tempted to dismiss it as a molehill, making a mountain out of a molehill. But Virginia Valiant wrote that mountains are molehills, piled one on top of the other. Small imbalances add up over time to disadvantage women. A computer simulation shows the importance of even very small amounts of bias if they're repeatedly encountered. Martel, Lane, and Emmerich simulated an 8-level hierarchical institution with a pyramidal structure. And they staffed this hypothetical institution with equal numbers of men and women. And the model assumed a tiny bias in favor of promoting men, a bias accounting for only 1% of the variability in promotion. After many series, the top was now 65% male. So even very small amounts of disadvantage can accumulate. And we know this lesson from compound interest, from evolution. Very small imbalances, if encountered repeatedly, add up over time to major differences. So in trying to understand the underrepresentation of women in positions of leadership, it can help for us to understand that we all, men and women, tend to see men as more competent and capable than women in work that is traditionally male, like leadership. We would like to think that our genuinely held egalitarian beliefs and meritocratic beliefs might buffer us from the effects of our gender schemas, but our evaluations and reactions occur outside of our awareness and unintentionally. So, like the example of me judging this engineer as not competent. I didn't certainly think that, but somewhere in my mind I did. So our belief in our own goodwill can actually make it difficult for us to see what we're doing. It doesn't mean that we can't institute remedies. We can, but we have to understand that good intentions are not enough. So I'm going to talk about 4 recommendations for what we can do to encourage more women in leaderships. First is to challenge gender schemas. We're all affected by people's expectations of us, and we tend to perform in a way that meets expectations. However, we can resist expectations, but we should be prepared that we may encounter negative reactions if we do so. So here's an example of how gender schemas work to define individuals' lives. In a study of attrition rates in a college pre-med program, researchers found that men dropped out of the program at lower rates than women. An analysis of the students' characteristics showed that men and women who were doing well stayed in the program at similar rates, but among those who were doing poorly, the women dropped out at higher rates. So gender schemas can help us to understand kind of why this is. Men have fewer acceptable alternatives than women do. A man who is having trouble in pre-med is unlikely to have society's blessing and his family's blessing to become a stay-at-home dad, for example, or a medical technician or a nurse instead of a doctor. So he will likely try harder. A woman is likely to have those blessings, and so she may try less hard. So how much perseverance is the right amount? Well, the odds are that we have too many male physicians who should have become nurses or medical technicians, and too many female nurses or technicians who should have become doctors. One reason people stop doing something difficult is because that they have other highly valued alternatives that are widely seen as appropriate, and gender schemas determine what those alternatives are. So each of us has the challenge of thinking beyond narrow gender schemas and seeing our lives more broadly. For men, the challenge is to see a full personal life as desirable and obtainable. So the gender schema for men is very narrow and excludes many of the characteristics that lead to a full personal life. For men to adopt characteristics like nurturance, concern about others, and expressiveness, they have to step out of the traditional confines of the male gender schema. Here's an example of challenging gender schemas from my life. When my first son was born, almost 4 years ago now, I took my maternity leave, and then when I was finished with that, my husband took his FMLA, and Family and Medical Leave Act, which is he's guaranteed by law. And he works at a very big employer and a big department, but he was the first man at his organization in his department to take paternity leave. Unfortunately, this is all too common, and it wasn't greeted with open arms, I should add. It's all too common that this is the case in workplaces, that new fathers aren't encouraged to take their paternity leave. So even though we have laws on the books that require employers to provide leave for fathers, until the workplace culture changes, men will not take that leave. And that culture changes one father at a time. So those who are at the top have a special responsibility to set the tone for the whole organization. So for those of you men in the audience who are, especially those in more senior positions who are at the beginning stages of starting your families, I encourage you to take your paternity leave for the good of the organization and for those who will follow you. That is a way to challenge gender schemas. And for women, the challenge is to see a full professional life as something that can coexist with a full personal life. Women have already incorporated much of the male gender schema already, but if women see a full professional life as conflicting with a full personal life, they may unnecessarily lower their professional aspirations. Efforts to make work-family balance more manageable can really help women in their professional lives. You may have heard about a new initiative from the National Science Foundation. It's a 10-year plan to help postdoctoral fellows and early career faculty members more easily care for dependents while continuing their careers. And this was announced at the White House maybe a month ago or 2 months ago. Some of the elements of the new initiative include allowing postponement of grants for childbirth and adoption and providing supplements to cover research technicians while PIs are on family leave. So these new policies are gender neutral, so they apply to both men and women, and they should help not only women in scientific research careers succeed in their professional roles, but also men in scientific research careers succeed in their personal lives. My second recommendation is to vouch for women. So for those of you who are leaders in entomology, you can help create more women leaders in your field by vouching for promising young female entomologists. In one experiment, undergraduate students watched a video of a group of graduate students having a discussion. At the beginning of the video, a faculty member introduced one of the graduate students as the leader. One set of undergraduates saw a version of the video in which the faculty member simply said, Susan, let's say, would be the leader. Another set of undergraduates saw a version in which the faculty member vouched for Susan's expertise, her theoretical knowledge, and her ability. Except for the introduction, the videotapes were identical. When the students were asked afterwards to evaluate how good a leader Susan was, they rated her more highly when the faculty member had vouched for her ability than when the faculty member had only said that she would be the leader. So leaders, in this case faculty members, can create other leaders by vouching for them. Third, invite women to serve in speaking and leadership roles in proportion to their representation in your field, and keep track. As we know, gender schemas represent men as more professionally competent than women. Because of this, if you're developing a list of potential speakers for your department's colloquia or about whom to put on a journal's editorial board, men's names are more apt to come to mind. So if you're putting together a speaker series or a conference, take the extra time and effort to ensure that the percentage of women represented reflects the percentage of women in your field. So at least a quarter women if you're putting together a group of established entomologists, or just around half women if you're putting together a group of student entomologists. Program committees, colloquium organizers, journal editors, everybody needs a policy. Keep track of who is invited and ensure that the end result is representative of the people in your field. And finally, encourage women to run. Studies on women in elected political positions show that women are more likely to run than men to run for office because they were recruited, encouraged, or asked to run rather than deciding to run on their own. In one study of state representatives, over half of the female representatives had not considered running for political office until someone suggested it. Men, in contrast, were much more likely to have the idea to run for office on their own. Research shows not only do women need to be recruited, women generally need to be encouraged to run multiple times before making the decision to run for elected office. Encouragement from established leaders can be especially effective since it can provide confidence to women to hear from somebody who's already in this position of leadership that they think that this woman could also do that job successfully. So encourage women to run for elected office. If you know a woman who you think would be a great leader of the ESA, tell her so and encourage her to run for a leadership position. In closing, I've talked about a number of obstacles that women face in science and engineering and in leadership in general today. But I hope that what sticks with you from this talk are the messages of what each of us can do to counteract these obstacles and open these fields and leadership positions more fully to women. If you'd like to read more about why so few girls and women pursue science and engineering careers, you can download a PDF of the report at this website here. It's on AUW's website at that URL. And there are also some copies of the report available here at the conference as well. And if you'd like to contact me, my email address is there. So, and we don't have time for questions here today, but why so few will be a topic of one of tomorrow's Lunch and Learn sessions. So if you'd like to join the discussion and learn more about the findings presented there, please join me tomorrow at 12:45 at the Why So Few Lunch and Learn session. And I'd like to thank you all for being such an attentive audience. And once again, I'd like to thank President Delfos for inviting me here to Reno and more generally for his commitment to diversifying his field. Thank you.